Going live, Alan. Going
Waiting.
live. That was really scary there for a
That
second. I
was
didn't
a
think we'd make
technical
it.
error.
You know, I pressed go live, and what happened was it said, "Please try later." Please try later.
Please wait, as you have not paid your subscription. And that's all we need to say about that.
All right, what are we talking about today, Alan?
You tell me.
I'll tell you. I was going to grab my LP, but
I'll give you
didn't
a
have
hit.
time.
I'll give you a guess.
Oh, Maiden. Oh, Maiden.
Can you believe it? 40 years.
40 years.
Holy cow.
Last
Man,
second.
what an
Last
album.
second, Alan. Last second. It's 40 years. I go, you know what? We got to talk about this.
We got to do Maiden. My second favorite album of the collection, I must say.
Yeah, I would say, let me just adjust something here. Yep, I agree.
I love this album.
Yeah, me too. And it just gets better over time.
The album cover alone, you know what I mean?
Like when you think of Iron Maiden, you think of that album cover, right?
It's a classic.
Like Number of the Beast is great, but there's just something so brilliant about that album cover, right? It's just you got what is it, Charlotte the Harlot there in the corner?
For me, everything took a step up. Okay, like I listened. It's funny that he said let's do the show. It's 40 years, and I just finished listening to this last week, right? And I mean, just the Ides of March. Just the opening sound with Martin Birch producing. The sound is as Steve would say, chalk and cheese compared to the first one, right? I mean,
all right.
The first one's hard to go back and listen to. You hear the songs live and they're so powerful, and then you go back to the first album and it's like, oh man, this really takes away from the whole experience. But this album really steps up and delivers. And in fact, Steve wanted Martin Birch on the first album, but didn't think that they were worthy enough to reach out to this guy who's done everything from Rainbow and Black Sabbath and Fleetwood Mac. They were just the new kids on the block in their first album. But unbeknownst to Steve, Martin Birch, when he heard the first album, he said, "Why didn't they call me? I would have loved to have done this." A missed opportunity that was rectified on the second album.
Yeah.
And intro to Mr. Adrian Smith, right? Dennis Stratton no longer in the band.
Can you believe it's been 40 years?
Who's that?
The album was released. It was 40 years ago.
No, I know. That's what I'm saying.
It's like it's shocking. Okay, go ahead.
Adrian Smith's on the band. Dennis Stratton's out. And, Adrian tried to have success with his own band, Urchin.
Yeah.
And it didn't quite pan out. And he found himself really with not much of a future in that band. And he just happens to bump into Dave and Steve, who they wanted in the band on the first album. But Adrian wanted to do his own thing, of course. And they just bumped him and said, "What are you doing?" "Nothing." "Want to join us?" "Yeah, sure." It was as simple as that, right? And it's just and Clive Burr, of course, his drumming is still my favorite Maiden drummer. I mean, he's got that kind of swing feel and delivering the licks and the drum fills that are still legendary today, right?
Yeah, I mean, the songwriting on this album. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Clive Burr. There's a certain, they kind of went Neil Peart when they had, let's say, I wouldn't call them bottom, but I call them, they had think of a Cozy Powell-ish drummer, and then they went Neil Peart with Nico, right? So there's definitely a change, and like you always say, Burr was the feel. He was the feel, the drummer with the feel, and an incredible drummer. In terms of the songs, all right. So Martin Birch produces this. The production holds up to this day, does it not?
It's the first thing I noticed when I put the needle down on the vinyl. It just it's so live.
So Dave Murray came out saying Dave Murray was an Urchin with Adrian for a while.
For a little bit, yeah.
They tried to recruit Adrian. Yes,
that's when Steve fired Dave from Iron Maiden.
Yeah.
He didn't want to do it, but the singer kind of forced him to do so. And there was a big mistake, and he went back and got Dave, and that's when Dave was with Orchard. And Steve calls him, "Look, I'm getting the band back together. Are you in?" And Dave's like, "Yeah." Sorry, Adrian, I'm out of here.
Bye-bye.
And Dave actually gets a writing credit on this album
Yeah,
as
in
well.
Twilight Zone, right?
So yeah, I mean, look, I got a number of the Beast was my first introduction to Maiden in '82
Yeah.
and June, I believe it was, and then I went back and cut the back catalog, and I actually bought this in '83, September of '83, and. But I remember my friend's older brother had actually seen him on the Killers tour. They were playing smaller clubs. And he walked out and said, that's like the loudest concert he's ever heard in his life. I don't know where they were playing, but I guess they blew the roof off. So, and then, Paul's voice, everything about this, I mean, including Paul's voice, there's a maturity, I think, that was lacking from the first one. And unfortunately, it was Paul's last album with them. But I mean, what a way to go out, Innocent Exile, Rothschild, just the vocal delivery on Killers. And then you got the softer, more delicate pieces.
And Paul told us, I can't remember which interview, but whatever interview it was, he said Martin Birch really worked him hard. And to this day, those skills that he sort of instilled in him as he was recording that album, he carries it on to today, when he does studio recordings. Because, Birch has that, that Deep Purple...
Headmaster.
The Headmaster.
Headmaster Birch.
He was like...
It's written right here. I was just reading this before we went on. Like, produced, engineered, and bullied by Martin Headmaster
That's
Birch.
A good point.
But I know that Paul also told us he much prefers the first album, the rawer sound, than to this polished sound.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, when this first came out, Killers, the critics were very non-committal. In fact, one critic gave it a 1-star rating. Of course, another side story to that was that Paul had kind of broken up with this said reviewer and left her. And I think a little revenge was into the one-star rating. But again, it was like at the time, New Wabam was kind of already dusted off and ready for the 6-foot grave.
Yep.
And they maybe felt a little bit of the backlash, where I think, the first album went into charts at number 4. This one went in at number 12. So we can see where the movement of New Wabam was starting to fade already.
When you talk to bands, like I'll give you one example, like Scott Ian, you read his book. What was the album that inspired him, right? It was Killers. There was something about Killers that inspired generations of bands and musicians and people wanting to get into music.
No, and again, like a lot of this stuff was already written, right? They were working it back in '77 all the way up until the release of their first. They had to choose what were the best songs for the first album, and so a lot of these, like Rothschild, was a leftover. You said Purgatory was a song that was previously titled Floating.
This is a funny comment from Matthew, biggest Maiden fan. I just joined, was watching Monsieur Legault's press conference. I hope Dr. Urata and Monsieur Legault can join on this discussion. Probably not. I put him more as a Creed fan, Mr. Legault.
So, again, acoustic guitar, right? I mean, it took them, until Dance of Death to reintroduce an acoustic guitar in an album? So
yeah, Prodigal Son. And it's probably one of the newer songs that were written for the album. Shocking enough, and I discuss this back and forth, it was never really played in the Iron Maiden years, like the Diano set, right? There was a strict set list that they had when they toured North America and Europe, right? But they never put Prodigal Son in the set list. Has Paul played the song live? I would guess. I think I asked him once, why don't you put Prodigal Son in the set list? And he goes, yeah, maybe. But that was about it. I mean, I don't know if he's actually played it. Maybe he's tried it. Maybe he hasn't. I don't know. Maybe in the Battle Zone days.
Well, Murders in the Rue Morgue is a song that they still play, today, right? And it's a kind of a treat for the fans to hear Bruce sing some of the earlier stuff.
Yeah.
But it's that's another classic off that album. So 2 instrumentals, right? Ides of March and Genghis Khan.
And Ides of March, the history behind that is Thunderburst, taken off of Samson's Head On album, right? So Thunderstick writes the song or the drum pattern with Steve in the band in his Iron Maiden years, takes that song to Samson, records it. Meanwhile, Iron Maiden recorded it Ides of March. Steve gets the credit on Samson as a co-writer with Barry Purkis, who's Thunderstick, but Barry does not get the
Barry
credit.
doesn't get it.
Doesn't get the
Maiden
credit.
albums.
Sorry, Barry. All right, so next, Rothschild.
Yeah, what a way to start the album, right? I mean, after the
March,
instrumental, the
Rothschild,
instrumental's
right.
kind of a build up, and it's kind of with those great drums, and leads right into Rothschild. And man, like when we did our top 10 list of Iron Maiden songs, Rothschild certainly made that list. It's what a great lyric, you know.
And that song goes back. You're talking, that was one of the 1977, probably even before songs, right? Metal for Muthas, Mothers, Muthas.
Mothers.
I mean, there's different versions of that song, right? And the one that appears in Killers, of course, is a re-recorded version of it. And probably that's why the critics were so hard on them on Killers, because they kind of heard those songs in the past in the UK, and suddenly they're kind of like regurgitating. I wouldn't call it regurgitating, but refinessing these older songs. No?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thought I lost you there. You froze.
No. I mean,
You're sucking it in. You're just
again,
sucking
it's
it all
just just the production and the professionalism. They had matured so much from the first album, I find, and I can't understate the contribution of Martin Birch to that sound, making him such a much more mature sounding band. And of course, the next one knocked it out of the park. So
Murders in the Rue Morgue, that nice slow harmonics, the guitar, and then it just like picks up Edgar Allan Poe's short story. But I think they twisted at the end, right? And the guy who killed the two women in Paris was actually that character.
no, don't spoiler alert here if you're going to
It's
tell
been
them what the
spoiled for
story's
40
about.
years.
And then the great album covers from all the singles. I remember back in the day, all the picture discs or the singles they would always send out. There was the one with Twilight Zone where the woman's in front of the mirror putting her lipstick and stuff on. You got Eddie, and you could see him as a ghost in behind. Purgatory. Oh, if I could just do this here, my second favorite album.
Where are you going, Alan?
Right. Look at this.
Jesus,
Look at
this. This is crazy. It's like,
Look at that. Is that great?
yeah, it is. It is.
That's my second favorite album cover.
I'm happy you flipped around for that.
Half Eddie, half the devil. Classic.
Yeah, here's another cool point by Kamen. He told me about this right before. Derek Riggs created the artwork for The Number of the Beast during this time period, and it was intended to be the single artwork for Purgatory that you just showed, right? But the band decided that the artwork was so good that it should be used for the next album, and Derek Riggs had to create the Devil Eddie artwork to be used as a single that you just saw when Alan turned his back to us. All right.
I mean, again, just with Maiden alone, right? Like, name another artist that did an album cover for another band, but everybody knows Derek Riggs.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how much influence his album covers had. I mean, we've discussed this before. Like Power Slave, you're spending hours trying to see all the hieroglyphics in the tombs, and then Somewhere in Time's a classic, right? I mean, you got so much going on there, and that's all the Derek Riggs, right up until Fear of the Dark, right? That's when they.
And you know what? It was always the question of who's that person that's being killed, right? Who's that? Is that Margaret Thatcher at the time? Because you had that picture from Running Free, right?
Yeah.
Was that a continuation of it all?
And then Women in Uniform was Maggie's Revenge, and
yeah.
And again, like this, you see the Ruskin
Or was
arms.
this Farrah Fawcett at the time? Who knows?
Ruskin arms, and this is, Derek said he's never visited this area of London, but the guys talked about it so much. This was kind of his impression of the neighborhood. You know,
Yeah.
all the Ruskin arms and you got Charlotte. I think you got Charlotte undressing somewhere,
there.
and you got the people peeking through their windows. And if you want to read it, there's another book, Jim, that I find is really great. I recommend it to everybody. This is the authorized biography, Run to the Hills. I got the 3rd edition.
Well, here's the book
But I
that I
mean,
really like.
I must have read this through about 15 times, right? So
Yeah.
and it's a great read for any Iron Maiden fan. It's like the Bible as far as I'm concerned.
Well, this is like the Bible to me because I'm on chapter 2. That's why. Talking about killers. So, and going through the songs, Alan, take a song like Another Life, another song that was taken from the 1977 lineup with Dennis Wilcock on vocals, the big troublemaker, Terry Wapram, I think I'm pronouncing that right, on guitar, Tony Moore on keyboards. So, I mean, you're talking about Another Life has a history, like a deep history, 1977. And of course, Genghis Khan, I'm not quite sure when that song was written. Was that written during the 80s, like right before the album came out? I don't know when they actually wrote it. So if somebody knows out there when Genghis Khan was written, please tell us.
But in another point, though, to go back to what I was saying earlier about the new album, Rod Smallwood, when you have a good manager, like Zeppelin had probably the best with Peter Grant, and Rod Smallwood with Iron Maiden, that takes a band to heart and does what he has to do to make the band popular. I mean, Diamond Head was supposed to be the next Zeppelin. And there's, stories of Bud Prager, who was the manager for Foreigner, who was super hot at the time, coming over to see if he wanted to manage them. And they were being managed by Sean Harris's mother at that point. And he's like, yeah, I'm interested in your band. And she's like, who are you? It's like, only Bud Prager, his band has only sold about 50 million copies of their albums. But so again, when these guys got signed by EMI, Rod says, give me 3 albums. I need 3 albums to establish what I need them to do. We'll take this much off the first album, this much I need for the second album. The third album, you don't have to pay us anything. We should be more sufficient right then. And he went and met all the artist reps in America, made sure they had a good time, got them all wasted, got them all blind drunk. And so when I come back in 6 months with my band, don't worry, Rod, we'll be working for you. He went there and physically met all these guys, shook their hands, took them out for a great time so they'll remember him when he needed them later on when Maiden toured America.
And so they did, and so they pulled in the end.
Again, this is not too many bands got this type of manager hands-on with their manager,
The sixth member of Maiden, actually the 7th today, right?
Yeah.
Always considered part of the band.
Locked him onto the Kiss tour.
Yes, which was huge.
Judas Priest.
Yeah.
So they were always opening with such, just and perfect fits, right? Priest and Maiden. I mean, who wouldn't want to see that? That was just a natural fit, right?
Yeah. Another interesting fact is Twilight Zone, how it wasn't included in the UK release or the European release, but it was included in the North American release. So we got that track, and I always thought it was part of the album, right? Back in the day. So that's a cool little snippet. Released as a single.
The album went platinum in Canada and then gold just about everywhere else. So
it's interesting how the album never really had a Run to the Hills type song. I mean, you could say Rothschild, but at the same time, it never really had that hit single. It was more of an underground cult.
No, and even Innocent Exile, I think the Made in Japan version is the one everybody kind of remembers a little bit more than even the studio version.
But strange enough, the first album, it was Running Hills that was carrying that album because they went on, Top of the Pops.
It was Running Free, you mean?
Running Free, yeah. Running Free. They played that on Top of the Pops. They had that hit. That kind of hit, right? In the album, it helped the album, but they didn't really have that hit. It was more of a deep cut album. And Twilight Zone probably the closest thing to a hit, but at the same time, it's not really, to me, it's like a deep track. The whole album's full of deep tracks. It's just a great, heavy album. You know how I got the album? I'll tell you the story. It was a gift. It was a gift exchange. I can't remember if it was Christmas or just a gift exchange in school, grade 7. And this girl said, okay, what do you want? and go, give me the new this Iron Maiden album. You're killers. And her mother gave her shit, because why are you buying this for him? This is disgusting. This is disgraceful. True story. She told me her mother was giving her shit. It's like, well, you can't buy that. Because back then, this is like the craziest thing you could ever think of, right? So that's why I put it on. I didn't even know what the song sounded like. I had absolutely no idea. I put it on, like, it wasn't. They weren't playing it on the radio. They weren't playing it on the radio, so you had no idea. And I was like, then after that, I got Made in Japan, and then after I got Made in Japan, I got the first album. And
Made in Japan, lovely, great album cover too. I love the colors on that album.
Yeah.
And it was a nice introduction to Maiden too. Another smart move, right? I mean, $5.99, and you got 5 songs live, and they were all top hit songs. So it was just another nice way to introduce people to Iron Maiden. So
yeah, and the song "Killer" is interesting. Little note there. When they played live at the Rainbow, there was, I think it's the Rainbow, right? There was alternate lyrics. Like the first lyrics, I think Paul was just mumbling anything. And then they actually sat down and finished it and did a proper lyric.
It's a different set of lyrics on the album than when they're earlier live.
That's right. And Drifter, going back. I mean, another song that goes back into the deep history of Iron Maiden. When there was no Paul Di'Anno. Paul Di'Anno was the third singer, right? And, basically a fan favorite. You could hear it on a lot of their bootlegs. Drifter, singing yo-de, 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 yo with the fans. And, of course, Purgatory, which was called Floating back in the day. So a lot of name changes here and there.
No, but a great, you got Adrian with his leopard print vest on, which he still regrets to this day, but cool guitar. Dave could do it all, right? A great guitarist. Like they said, the first album, they didn't really need Dennis. Dave could do all the guitar parts. So,
yeah. And
of course, Clive Burr's strumming. I mean, there's a lot going on, and he's just like a great feel. And he just looks so great. I mean, he was a great fit to the band, right? I mean, yeah, all 5 of them young guys, and that's it. That's what they lost, is kind of that punk feel. But when Paul left the band, but again, I don't see Paul being as cosmopolitan as visiting all these countries that Maiden eventually did. Where Bruce always tried to learn the local language, would always say something with the local language. And I know when it comes to Montreal, I don't think he believes anybody here speaks English. I mean, Bruce would spend the whole night speaking in French. So
it was pretty.
Hats off to him.
Pretty well. He speaks pretty well in French too. I got to say, he's pretty fluent. He does a good job. You're right. And then comes the demise of Paul Di'Anno, or the exit of Paul Di'Anno. He says he never liked the production on this album. He thought it was too polished, and it was upsetting him. And then he got tired of touring. And then I don't know if drugs and alcohol played a role, but I'm sure that played a role in every band. And a lot of people saying that he knew the writing was on the wall, that he was going to be pushed out, so he just quit before they pushed him out. So I mean, I guess a combination.
It was like, if you piece it all together, I mean, he was living a rock and roll lifestyle, because that's why Paul told us. That's why he got into a band to begin with. It's not to fit schedules and make sure I'm going to plan my life 3 years in advance and what tour we're going to be on. So that affects your voice after a while, right? So then there's nights you couldn't go on. There's nights that they had to force him out there. He was, according to Steve, Paul was faking these fainting spells, and, he would always come around and deliver for the show, but it became kind of a stress that they probably didn't need with their touring schedules being what it was at that time. And like you said, Paul says he quits, and they said they were going to fire him. So it's neither here or there. I mean, it's his last album with them, and a lot of fans think it's probably their best album too. And
I'm one of those.
Fan by Paul.
Yeah, it's kind of like,
and even Paul admits, like he said it to us a lot of his time. I mean, Maiden that's the singer. Bruce was the singer that Maiden should have got, and he thinks they're a much stronger band with Bruce. And no harm, no foul. I mean, we got 2 great albums with Paul, and then the rest is history with Bruce. So
my thing was, they should have done at least one more album with Paul. I got to tell you, Alan. So I'm listening to. I didn't even know Paul left the band because back then I just didn't know Paul left the band. I just kind of had the albums. I was a fan. I knew they came through town, but I was young, right? So I didn't know Paul left. And suddenly, I think on the radio they go, "Okay, we're playing the new Iron Maiden song." It's like Show 'em FM, right? And it's Run to the Hills, and I go, "Wow, Paul sounds different." Paul Paul sounds different. And then upon researching what happened, it's not Paul anymore. And I was kind of upset. And when I did see the Number of the Beast tour, there were also other people upset, but Bruce won everybody over at the end of the day. So there was
it's one way of saying it. Yeah,
but there was a lot of people upset. People were upset that Paul was in the band. He was part of that success back in the day, right? And to me, I don't know. I would have liked a few more albums with Paul. I don't know.
And that summer of 82, you can go anywhere without hearing Run to the Hills, right? I mean, it was blasting everywhere. That's why I went and picked the album up. And then, of course, everything that came after, right? Then you listen to the albums. And Invaders was an odd opener, not as strong as Rothschild and Killers, that's for sure. But then, Children of the Damned, 22 Acacia Avenue, The Prisoner.
But we asked Paul. Paul, was there any songs from Number of the Beast that was sort of left over that you worked on? And he said absolutely nothing. So it was all fresh.
Yeah.
But you know what? Here's my theory. My theory is when Paul left the band, Steve was writing songs with Paul's voice in mind because he's with Paul for 3 years now, right? And you could see that lower register Number of the Beast, not on all tracks, but a lot of that aggressive tone. There's this little bit of a punky attitude from Bruce, right? And I think it's because Steve was writing with Paul's vocals in mind. Now, fast forward to Blaze Bayley. Steve was writing with Bruce's vocals in mind when he was writing the songs for Blaze, which are a little higher than he could handle, right? So it's kind of like, you see where I'm getting at? Or maybe I'm not getting at anywhere.
I hear you, but I don't know where you're getting at.
Okay, yeah. Well,
but again, we go back to Blaze, like our kids' age, they were introduced to Maiden during the Blaze era.
Yeah.
So their favorite albums are like Virtual X and the X Factor, Virtual 11, and whereas we're like, what? Huh? Oh, no, it's got to be a Bruce album. And then before us, no, Paul had it all. So it just depends when you listen to it and which version of Maiden that you tuned in on at the get-go. So
I know that Paul, he hasn't walked in 3 to 4 years, and I know there's a fundraising for him to get some money. So if you love Paul, I guess it'd be a nice thing to help him out. He hasn't walked now, I think, in 4 years. So it's kind of he's a legend. There's a legacy there, definitely.
I remember seeing him live here in Montreal, and I mean, he was just limping right up until the mic. And then when we interviewed him, there's nothing left, no cartilage whatsoever, bone on bone. And I mean, that was years ago. He was looking to get a replacement done. And sad to hear that it never happened. So
yeah, and then the worst thing is, I think he was scheduled for surgery, and then the whole COVID thing just delays it another year, right? I mean, again.
You imagine the pain you're living with during that time. So.
Yeah, I mean, nobody should go through that amount of pain, and he's just waiting. And it's been rough. So hats off to Paul. Hope he gets better. We talk to him from now here and there. We talk to him, and he gives us an update. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, what a joy! He's always a great interview, that's for sure, Paul. And yeah, I mean, there's nothing really left to say. It's just
so everybody, I'll just ask
again,
you
for me,
this.
it's the production, Jim. It stands out so much compared to that first album, and of course, they had years and years of great sounding records with Martin Birch, and his big thing later on in their career was trying to get as much music on. They would say this album contains 55 minutes worth of music because you had to get the grooves, couldn't be too tight. They had to be equally spaced, but they tried to cram on as much of music onto an album as possible. Yeah. That was his biggest challenge years later. So
yeah, well, everybody out there who's watching, just tell us just your favorite track off of Killers. as a sort of homage to Killers? Tell us your favorite track. For you, Alan, what would it be?
My favorite track on this?
Ides
I'd
of
have
March.
to say
Ides of March.
Rothschild.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think for me,
Killers.
I think Killers has got to be the most brutal Iron Maiden song that there is. Hands down, throughout their whole catalog.
Which one, Jim?
Killers.
Yeah. Killers is a good song too. I just love the lyrics in Rothschild,
Yeah.
My mother was a queen, I was never meant to be,
And
My
funny
father-
enough, yeah, there is no word called Rothschild in the English language. That's another point. That was a sort of play on words. At least to
And
my
it worked.
understanding.
It
Yeah,
worked.
It worked. I always liked, for me, it's been Killers, Murders in the Rue Morgue, and let's see if I was going to name tracks. Yeah, Rothschild's a given.
I like the
And
Innocent
Twilight
Exile.
Zone. And Twilight Zone. I think the vocal delivery on Twilight Zone is Paul at his best. That's a
Innocent
tough
Exile too, but I prefer the Maiden Japan version, the live version. It's supposed to be written for his grandfather. Paul wrote it for his grandfather, apparently. But then there's another one that he doesn't get credit on this album. He might get credit for it later on in other albums. So
Here I like this. So Salty goes Charlotte the Harlot. Joey goes Phantom. Okay, guys, we're talking about this one right
we're
here.
looking for this album.
Prodigal. Paulo
songs.
says Prodigal Son, which I don't think they touched the acoustic guitar until what, 25 years later, right?
Yeah, it was Dance of Death was the first one when it came back. Acoustic guitar came back. They made a big deal about it. No, but Prodigal Son, that's a great track too. It's really different, and again, it goes back to maturity. But a lot of people say, hey, there's no Phantom of the Opera here. There's no Running Free, like you were saying earlier. But that's what I like about the album. You could consider them all kind of deep tracks, right?
Yeah.
To a certain extent. But I mean, just a super strong album. And I mean, you got into Killers, and then I kind of went backwards. I got Number of the Beast, and I went back and got Killers, and then I got Iron Maiden a week later after I got Killers, and then of course Peace of Mind. Then it was a race who would be the first one to buy the Iron Maiden albums ever after, right?
It's funny. Cayman said they used to integrate the Police walking on the moon. The yo 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 yo.
Yeah.
That part into Drifter. I don't know. Was that some sort of like, live chant that people did back in the day? I don't know if it was the Police's or did the Police steal that from other bands and it's just kind of the thing to do back then. I don't know. K-Man saying Murderers, Tony saying the whole album is a classic. Steelhead is saying Rothschild. Funny enough,
I agree.
Funny enough, on Thunderbolt, Thunderstick, on his original picture that he took, they had reel-to-reel rehearsal tapes. And if you look at the sort of the writing of all the tracks on the reel-to-reel, he wrote Rothschild as Rothschild, like in the Rothschilds, the family, the Rothschilds. And you kind of put the lyrics together and you kind of say Rothschilds, maybe a bastard son from the Rothschilds. I don't know. Maybe he flipped it around afterwards, but, read the lyrics, think of the Rothschilds, and maybe it's somewhere there. I don't know. Maybe it's just some sort of fantasy. Mr. Rockin' Dodge. By the way, there is an acoustic guitars in Revelation.
Yeah, but I'm talking...
Yeah, you're right. There is. Kind of.
Well, it's kind of acoustic sounding. It might be acoustic too, but there's a lot of electric going on there as well. But this is an intro and a song that's really acoustic guitar, right?
Yeah. It's strange enough. Like again, Prodigal Son. I would think they didn't want to play it live because they didn't want to get away from that street punky metal, new wave of British heavy metal style. Because that would kind of like people, what's going on here? What's going on here? Simon and Garfunkel? What's happening? Right? I don't know. I'm just guessing.
I mean, they played on this Seventh Son of a Seventh Son tour. They played a whole blues thing. Steve, to give Bruce his voice a rest. I mean, they went into this whole kind of bluesy feeling thing, and we're all like, what's this about?
Yeah,
but it's
yeah.
just to give Bruce's voice a rest. So
Bruce does play the acoustic guitar. There's an acoustic break in Revelations. There probably is. There
no,
probably
no,
is. It's not
yes,
prominent. You're saying,
yes.
Alan,
What we're
it's
trying to
not a
say is,
prominent guitar. It's more of an overdub of guitar. That's what you're saying. On the prophecy on the seventh son, that too. Okay, I get you. Well, one thing's for sure, I miss Paul Diano.
yeah, you're a huge.
And I always wondered in my head, how would Number of the Beast sound with Paul Diano? I think it would be okay. I mean, okay, granted, it's not going to be the same, but I think it would have been more of an angrier, raw. It would have been a great album, but it's just a different album.
I mean, it's Bruce's perfection on that album, as far as I'm
I'm not
concerned.
going to argue there. It would have been a different album. So that's pretty much it.
Well,
Any other fun tips anybody has out there on
suffice it to say, we're blessed 40 years later that we can still talk about this great release, and we'll have to do it the next year for for which one next. So,
All right. Let's see. Asking everybody, any last comments? A lot of people watching, Alan. So I want to get some last comments here.
Iron Maiden.
Actually, Rock in Rio, where Bruce says, and now something from the Jurassic period. Did he say that? And they
Could
play
be, I
Rothschild.
don't know.
You don't remember, do you?
Could be, I don't know.
Tony says, Paul could never sing Children of the Damned or Hallowed Be Thy Name. I don't know. Hallowed Be Thy Name, I think he could. Children of the Damned, which is sort of, I think, an offshoot of Children of the Sea back in the day.
Are you allergic to your microphone? Because you just keep getting farther and farther away. You try to ease yourself out of the frame.
You know what it is? If I put it too close, I'll get too much distortion. That's why. All right.
Okay.
All
Well,
right, my friend.
this was fun.
All right, guys. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. 40 years.
Here
Killers.
on the Metal Voice, celebrating in
There it
many
is.
different ways.